The dungeon under Harrow Deep had killed 9 men that season. The Silver Vanguard called it profitable. They had brought Rowan down for one reason. Somebody had to carry the shovel. The porter Tam had died on the 2nd level. Garrick wanted him buried before the smell drew wraiths. He said it the way a man orders a stable mucked. Quickly, and without looking down. Rowan went where the body was. Going where the bodies were was his entire career. Tam lay wrapped in tent canvas, still wearing his boots. Nobody had bothered to close his eyes. Rowan closed them. His bandaged fingers had learned the gesture years ago, on colder faces than this. The party moved off to argue about the hall. Dead porters did not divide into shares. Morel looked back once at the canvas and the man kneeling beside it. She said nothing. Rowan chose a place where the stone had gone to soil. The dead deserved ground that would hold them. The shovel was grave iron, older than the guild. Its handle knew his hands better than anyone living did. He dug the way he did everything. Quietly. Properly, and with nobody watching. Torchlight from the party's camp reached him in scraps. He worked mostly by the memory of digging. The ledger came out when the grave was ready. Every man Rowan buried went into it by name. He asked the others for Tam's family name. Garrick said porters came with one name, like mules. Rowan wrote Tam of the 2nd level, and the date. It was more of a headstone than most men got. He unhooked the brass bell from his belt. In his whole life, nothing had felt heavier or mattered more. Rowan's class was Ritekeeper, rank F. The assessors had written no combat value on his card. Twice. He could not raise the dead, and he could not command them. He could only ask. A soul he honored might choose to answer him. Once. That was the whole of his power. In 11 years of graves, no soul had ever answered. Rowan asked anyway, every time. The unburied were another matter. Leave a man without his right, and something crawled back wearing his shape. The guilds called them wraiths and made a living killing them. Nobody asked where they kept coming from. He raised the bell over the open grave just as the torchlight guttered low. The cold came first. Wraiths came out of the far galleries with no sound at all. 7 of them, maybe more. They were black, the way a doused fire is black. Their eyes burned a cold and hungry blue. The Vanguard met them the way famous men meet everything, loudly, and certain they would win. Garrick's rapier went through the first one like an argument he had already won. He was smiling. Steel and spellfire filled the gallery. Nobody spared one glance for the man beside the open grave. Rowan did not run. He put himself between the fight and Tam's body and stayed there. A wraith broke past the line, straight for the corpse. The unburied dead always came for their own. Rowan swung the shovel with both hands, the way you close a door on winter. It connected. The wraith tore apart into smoke and ember light, more startled than slain. Nobody saw it happen. Morel was dragging a wounded spearman clear of the fighting. Her hands glowed pale and steady. For half a heartbeat, over the spearman's shoulder, she saw Rowan guarding the dead. She looked away first. The last wraith came apart on 3 blades at once. The Vanguard cheered itself, as always. Garrick flicked the smoke from his blade and declared the field clean. He had not once looked back. Somebody asked if the gravedigger was still alive back there. Somebody else said, "Who cares, the shovel is." Rowan's arms were shaking. He set the shovel down carefully, so nobody would see them do it. The party settled to bind wounds and count what the vault had paid them. Rowan went back to Tam. Burying a man properly means washing him, even in a dungeon. Rowan kept water for exactly this. He unwrapped the canvas, with the patience of a man, unwrapping something that could still be heard. The report said a wraith had taken Tam on the 2nd level. Claws, they said. Quick, they said. Rowan folded back the shirt to wash the wound. Then his hands stopped moving altogether. Claws tear. Claws leave a wound like a dropped plate. This was one line, thin and deliberate. Rowan had buried claw work for 11 years. He knew what a blade looked like when he saw one. A thin blade, pushed once, by someone who knew exactly where to push. On a porter. On Tam. He looked over at the firelight, at the heroes laughing over their shares. He drew no conclusion. Gravekeepers who asked questions did not stay employed. Rowan washed the wound and said nothing to anyone. But he made one small mark beside Tam's name in the ledger, a mark that meant wrong. He rapped Tam again, kinder this time, and lowered him down alone. The dead are heavier than they look. The filling of a grave is the loneliest work there is. Every shovelful says the same quiet thing. When the mound was shaped, Rowan knelt and took up the bell. The rite was owed in full. He rang the brass bell 3 times over the grave, thin sound, cheap bell, the only voice Tam got. He spoke the old words, "Go down easy, go down remembered, and rise if ever you are called." Then, as always, he asked, and the dark of the gallery answered the way it always had. Nothing. 11 years. Thousands of names. Not one soul had ever risen to a rank F Ritekeeper asking. He believed in the right anyway. Some men keep a faith. Rowan kept a ledger. Behind him, the camp was already striking tents. Heroes do not linger where the profit is spent. Garrick announced they would surface by nightfall and drink by moonrise. The men cheered him like a bonfire. Nobody proposed a word for Tam. His pay would be split before his grave went cold. Morel lingered a moment at the edge of the lantern light, facing the grave. Her lips moved once. If it was a prayer, it was a small one. And years too late. She followed the others. Rowan stayed until the mound was tidy and the name was dry. Then he shouldered the shovel. The climb out of Harrow Deep took the rest of the day. Rowan carried the cookpots. He also carried the tents, the spare torches, and every joke about carrying them. Garrick passed him once on the stair without slowing. Heroes did not slow for furniture. Daylight arrived like a rumor first, then like a verdict. The dungeon let them go reluctantly. The surface was gray moor and colder wind. It was still the prettiest thing he had seen in weeks. The wagons formed a line for the capital road. Somebody loaded Rowan's pack last, on principle. Garrick rode at the front, where the songs would say he had been. The column obeyed his posture. The Silver Vanguard was going home rich. The capital would cheer them through the gates by name. Rowan walked behind the baggage, where the dust settles and the wages end. It did not occur to one of them to offer him a seat. It no longer occurred to him either. He walked with the shovel on his shoulder, and the bell keeping small time against his hip. Inside his coat, against his chest, the ledger held 11 years of names nobody else had bothered keeping. One of the names was new, with a small mark beside it that meant wrong. Behind them, down in the dark, Tam lay under a tidy mound, remembered by exactly one man. The vanguard rode toward the cheering. Their gravekeeper walked behind with everything they would one day need. None of them looked back at the man behind the baggage. One day, all of them would. The capital took the Silver Vanguard back the way a mouth takes sugar. Bells rang. Garrick rode at the front, waving like a man collecting a debt the city owed him. Rowan walked behind the baggage where the cheering thinned and the horse dung began. Nobody cheered the mule either. Rowan had decided, years ago, to take that as company. The guild hall smelled of ale, oiled leather, and stories getting better by the telling. Garrick told the dungeon twice. Both times, the porter died bravely, and no one asked how. Rowan stood by the wall and heard the story grow a shape Tam never had. The clerk paid the party in silver. The word Gravekeeper was not on the roster at all. Garrick flicked one copper at his chest and said the smell had been buried nicely. The copper rang on the floorboards. Laughter went around the table like a passed cup. Rowan picked it up. A man who buries paupers learns not to leave copper lying. Morel did not laugh. She steadied her hands as if they belonged to someone else. He left before the song started. The door let him out like a held breath. The city was warm in every window he passed, and cold in every street between. He lived in a lean-to against the boneyard wall. The guild called it fitting. By candlelight he wrote Tam into the ledger, and the date, and the word remembered. He kept every name he had ever buried. Somebody had to be the place they went. Dawn found him at the paupers' field, where the city sent everyone it was done with. The dead cart came at first light. 4 bundles, no names, and a driver who never looked. Rowan dug 4 graves before the frost was off the grass. His hands knew the depth. He searched each bundle for anything with a name, a letter, a token, an initialed ring. The washerwoman's locket gave him one. He said it aloud 3 times so it would stay. For the nameless, he rang the bell longer. Whoever they were done being ignored. The rite was not magic anyone honored. A ring, a name, a promise of remembering. No wraith had ever risen from ground Rowan kept. Nobody had ever once wondered why. By noon, 4 mounds lay neat as made beds. He raked the edges anyway. Habit, respect. An old woman came asking where her son was laid. Rowan knew without opening the book. He walked her to the marker and stood back. Some things needed room more than words. She left him half a loaf she could not spare. It was more than the guild paid. Evenings, the lamplighters went out with poles, waking the soulstone lamps 1 cold blue star at a time. The city ran on soulstones. Lamps, forged fires, the cores of noble blades. Cheap, clean light. Merchants sold them by the ounce and swore they were mined, like tin from honest rock. A duelist's blade with a stone core, never dulled. Nobody asked what kept the edge fed. That night, a freight wagon rolled past him, crated and guarded, leaking thin blue light between boards. And at his belt, the little bell hummed. Soft, wrong, like a tooth beginning to ache. Rowan closed his hand over it until the wagon turned the corner. The humming followed the crates. It only ever hummed near the stones. He had told the guild once. They had laughed once. In the ledger's margin, he had written one question, years old now. Where do they come from? On the 7th day of every month, Rowan climbed the hill where the old knights slept. One grave set apart, marked with a carved greatsword. The kingdom that owed it never visited. Dame Isolde of the Vale, swordmaster to 2 kings, and buried at last by a boy. She had died out of favor, out of fashion, and out of everyone's memory except his. He had been 14, and nobody else would dig for a disgraced name, so he had. Now he sat with her the way you sit with family. He told her about Tam. He told her the wound had been thin and clean, and the story told about it wasn't. Her page was the ledger's first. The ink had gone brown, the promise had not. Sometimes, when the wind stood in the grass just so, the air above her stone almost listened. He always laughed at himself for it, quietly, and always came back the next month anyway. From her hill you could see the whole capital glowing, cold blue lamps, warm amber windows. He said goodnight to the stone. In 11 years it had never once said it back. Back in the city, something had the guild district buzzing like a kicked hive. Torches everywhere. A royal herald stood on the guild steps, and rumor ran ahead of him through the crowd. Rowan came home through the crowd's edge, smelling of grave earth, and stopped to listen. Morel was suddenly beside him, close enough to speak. He felt her decide to. Almost. She had watched them spend him for 4 years and carried it like a stone swallowed. Whatever she meant to say, she folded it away again, the way she always did. Her hand tightened on the satchel strap instead. Kindness that never spoke was only good posture. Then the herald raised his hand, and the square went quiet enough to hear torch flames. The crown had sealed the deep vault under the Grey Run Mountains for 100 years. Until now. A royal commission, the herald said. Riches below, and a plague of wraiths breeding around them. And one company chosen to open it. Garrick was climbing the steps before his name finished. The Silver Vanguard, by royal writ. The square roared his name until the torches shook. Garrick smiled at the crowd the way he smiled at ledgers. Something in it was counting. Rowan turned to go. Deep vaults and royal writs were weather that happened to other men. But Garrick's eyes found him over the crowd, the way a hook finds the slowest fish. He came down through the parted crowd, trailing applause, and stopped in front of his Gravekeeper. Deep places meant dead men, Garrick said pleasantly. Dead men meant smell. Smell meant a shovel. Rowan asked what his duties would be. Garrick said one word, already walking away. Carry? The crowd swallowed the hero again. Rowan stood in the cold spot where fame wasn't. That night, he packed the ledger first. Some part of him already knew there would be names. The vault gates stood older than the kingdom, and the kingdom had sent its brightest heroes to open them. Rowan came too. Somebody had to carry what the heroes could not be seen carrying. The royal commission hung from Garrick's saddle, wax and ribbon, worth more than every man reading it. Garrick said the vault would make them legends. He said it the way men recite a receipt. Morel checked her satchel 3 times at the threshold. Some part of her did not want to descend. The doors opened on a stairway built for funerals. 10 men wide, descending into cold, patient dark. Rowan read the walls as they went down. Names, once. Centuries of boots had worn them smooth. This was not a vault, he thought. Vaults hold money. This place had been built to hold people. The Vanguard lit soulstone lanterns, pale and blue and steady. Nobody asked what made the light. Rowan's bell gave one small shiver at his belt. He put his hand on it, and it stilled. He told himself it was the cold. He was good at telling himself things while he carried. The party descended in glory order, Garrick first. Rowan came last, under 60 pounds of other men's gear. They passed door after sealed door, each carved with a ledger of the dead. Garrick never slowed once. Rowan slowed at every one. He could not help it. Reading names was the only prayer he knew. Then he saw it. One door stood open, its seal cut clean. Cut from the outside, years ago. Inside, the shelves were empty. Whoever had rested there was gone, and nobody had ever reported a theft. The lanterns guttered all at once. In the hall below, something old put on its armor again. Hollow knights rose from the tomb dust, black smoke wearing rusted steel, ember eyes lighting one by one. The Vanguard moved like the professionals they were. Shields locked, blades out, every man earning his songs. Rowan did what furniture does in a battle. He stood against the wall and held the lanterns high. He watched the wraiths instead of the heroes. They fought like men who had forgotten why. Garrick's rapier went through a knight's ember eye, precise as bookkeeping. He was smiling while he worked. Morel's light knit a spearman's arm before he finished screaming. Her hands never shook. Her eyes did. A hollow knight broke through the line and came for the lanterns. Came, in other words, for Rowan. The knight raised its blade and Rowan's bell rang once against his belt. The wraith flinched, stopped. For one heartbeat, the ember eyes looked at him. Not hunger, something closer to a man remembering home. Then Garrick's rapier took its head off from behind, and whatever it remembered went out with the light. Garrick told Rowan to mind the baggage. He said it without looking. He never wasted looks on furniture. The last night came apart into smoke and old iron. The Vanguard cheered themselves. It sounded rehearsed. Where the wraiths fell, bones lay in the rust. Soldiers once. Men somebody had promised to bring home. The party moved on to loot the antechamber. Rowan set down the packs and took up the shovel. Nobody ordered him to bury them. Nobody had ordered him to breathe either. Some things simply were his. The tomb floor was stone, so he made graves of the alcoves, laying each man straight and covered. He wrote what the armor told him. A pikeman of the 3rd levy, a boy with mended boots. Where there was no name, he gave the next best thing. Known, he wrote. Known and set down. He rang the bell once over each of them. Small sound. It went further than sound should go. The Vanguard watched him work the way men watch weather. Only Morel stood still, hands folded, saying nothing. One of the Vanguard called it wasted daylight. Garrick allowed it anyway so the smell would not draw wraiths. That was the mercy of practical men. Even kindness had to be useful before they would permit it. Rowan finished the last name and closed the ledger. 41 men heavier. It never got lighter to carry. They went deeper. The stair gave way to tunnels no mason of the Old Kingdom had ever cut. These walls were new work. Pick marks. Cart rails. Somebody had been mining a tomb for years. Chalk tallies climbed the wall in neat fives, the handwriting of men paid by the count. Rowan asked no questions out loud. He had learned long ago where questions got a rank F man. But he noticed Garrick never once consulted the royal survey. The captain walked these tunnels like a landlord. They passed burial niches by the hundred, every one of them empty. A city of beds, all stripped. The bell would not stay quiet now. It shivered against his hip with every step he took downward. Morel dropped back beside him once, mouth half open around a question. Then Garrick called her name, and she went. Rowan was used to that. People approached him the way they approached graves. Quietly, and never for long. Twice more the dark stood up to fight them. 6 hired men went down and did not rise. The Vanguard cut them down without breaking stride. Practice, Rowan thought. Everyone down here had had years of practice. He buried what could still be buried and marked the rest. The ledger drank names like dry ground. The air changed near the bottom. Warmer. Sweeter. Wrong, the way a slaughterhouse is wrong before you see it. A glow rose from the last stair, pale, blue-white, breathing. The Vanguard's lanterns looked like children of it. Garrick straightened his cape before he went down, a man dressing for the best day of his life. Rowan came last through the arch, and stopped the way you stop at the edge of a cliff. The chamber went down beyond the lantern light, and every wall of it was full of stars. Soul stones, thousands upon thousands, veined through the rock, each one glowing with its own small, trapped light. The Vanguard whooped. Someone was already counting out loud. The word they kept using was rich. And Rowan's bell began to hum. Not shiver. Hum, steady and low, like a throat finding a note. It hummed the same small note near the guild stone lamps. He had never let himself finish the thought. He set down the packs and crossed to the nearest vein, slow, the way you approach a sickbed. Up close, the stone's light was not steady after all. It pulsed, slow and even and endlessly patient. Like breathing, he thought. Like a chest rising in a dark room where nobody comes anymore. He laid 2 bandaged fingers on the vein, and the bell at his belt sang out loud and grieving. The right bells only sang for one thing. He had rung them over 1,000 graves. He knew. The stones were not treasure. The stones were people. Pressed small, pressed silent, and sold by the ounce. The lamps in the guild hall. The cores in the fine blades. The empty niches, 100 floors of them. Rowan stood very still, while the world rearranged itself around a small humming bell. And across the chamber, Garrick was not watching the stones at all. Garrick was watching him. Their eyes met over the pale light. Garrick smiled, thin and unhurried, like a man closing a ledger. Garrick had known, Rowan realized. Had always known. And now the captain knew that Rowan knew it too. Morel looked from the stones to Rowan's face, and something in her went pale beneath the pale light. Garrick clapped once and called for a camp. He congratulated his heroes. He praised the crown's wisdom. Then he drew 2 engineers aside where the light was thinnest, and his voice went quiet and exact. Rowan, stacking crates in the dark, watched the engineers unpack coils of fuse and small black casks. Garrick told them to set the charges along the lower galleries. He said it was for the hall. Men say true things carelessly, and false things with care. Garrick placed each word like a coin. The bell hummed on against Rowan's hip, soft as a voice under floorboards. He closed his hand around it. He did not yet know for whom the charges were meant. The mountain already did. The sappers worked by lantern light, kneeling at the load like men at prayer, setting charges. Garrick called it the hall. He said the word, the way merchants say it, warm and clean. Rowan stood by the 6 fresh graves he had dug, and the stones hummed against his bell. The brass bell would not stop its small trembling. It knew what the load was made of. He asked Garrick for 1 hour more. The dead were not finished being told goodbye. Garrick said the schedule was the schedule. He said it without turning his head. The Vanguard began carrying crates up the tunnel. Nobody carried anything toward the graves. Morel paused at the tunnel mouth with her satchel. She looked at Rowan. She said nothing. She had spent years not saying anything. It had gotten easy, the way bad habits do. Rowan knelt and finished the last rite anyway. Some work does not wait on schedules. He wrote the 6 names slowly. A man should not be hurried out of the world. The sapper lieutenant asked if the F rank was coming. Garrick said he would follow presently. Presently. Rowan heard the word and did not hear the shape of the lie inside it. The last lantern went up the tunnel with the last man. The dark leaned in, patient. Garrick stood in the tunnel mouth, a silhouette with perfect posture. He watched Rowan work. He said Rowan had good eyes. He said good eyes were expensive to leave walking around. Rowan straightened up slowly among the graves. He understood then. Understanding arrived like cold water. He did not beg. He asked who would bury the dead if the Vanguard buried him. Garrick thought about it. He said, with real courtesy, that nobody buried a shovel. The signal was small. Wars are ended that way, and men with 2 polite fingers. Somewhere above, a fuse took the flame. It ran into stone like a rumor. Rowan ran. The graves were behind him and the world was ahead, and neither waited. The charges spoke once. The vault answered. The ceiling came down like a verdict. The last thing the light showed him was Garrick's back, already walking, already somewhere else. Then the stone shut its mouth over Rowan, and the dark was total and near. Above, the Vanguard felt the floor shudder and kept climbing. Grief was not on the manifest. Morel stopped on the stair. The dust reached her boots. She closed her eyes and climbed. Garrick reported a tragic collapse and 1 loss, rank F. He signed the form beautifully. Under the world, Rowan woke to a weight on his chest and a silence with texture. The air pocket was the size of a coffin. His body knew that word before he did. He pushed against the slab until his fingers opened old wounds through the bandages. Nothing moved. He screamed then. The stone took the sound and gave nothing back. Stone never does. Panic is a spender. It bought nothing with his air and asked for more. He made himself count breaths. 4 in, hold, 4 out. Gravekeepers are good at counting. His hand found another hand in the dark. Colder than his. Patient. In a different way. The collapse had opened the 6 graves. The dead he had settled lay unsettled around him. Nobody was coming. He knew the arithmetic. Rescue is for people whose names get said. He thought about the copper in his pocket and laughed once. It was not a good sound. The dying do inventory. He had a shovel, a bell, a ledger he could not read, and 6 broken rites. So he did the only thing he had ever been good for. He began again. He found their faces with his fingers and put each one back the way dignity goes. He said their names from memory. Bram. Odo. Littlewick, who had carried the lanterns. He could not see the ledger. It did not matter. He knew every name by heart. He rang the bell once for each of them, 6 small sounds against a mountain's weight. The rite asks the honored dead to rest. His voice shook, and he asked it anyway. The air was going somewhere he could not follow. He gave the last of it to the dead. At the end, he talked to Isolde, the way he had talked to her grave for years. He told her he was sorry the graves were shallow. He did not ask her for anything. The dark went quiet in a new way. Then, far under everything, something chose. The bell at his belt rang once, by itself. Rowan's hands were nowhere near it. Like the color of new leaves, gathered itself out of the broken stones, patient and bright. He had kept graves his whole life, and no soul had ever once answered. Souls own nothing. Dame Isolde rose out of the dark in night's plate, silver hair drifting like slow water. She looked at the mended shrouds, the rung bell, the man spending his last air on rites. Then Isolde said a thing the living had never said to him. She said, "Thank you." 11 years in the guild and his pay had been copper and silence. The dead paid better. He tried to warn her about the rule. 1 service, then forever. He knew the price. Isolde told him to save his breath. She had already decided what her 1 service was. Her service was not digging. Her service was seeing his rite finished, however long that took. A knight chooses her post. She had chosen his side, and stone was merely in the way. She told the mountain, in the manner of commanders, that it was standing in her road. The greatsword fell. 10 tons of stone split like kindling before 100 years of mastery. Air came through the breach, wet and cold and alive. He drank it and wept. She carried him where the climb was cruel. Spectral hands, she observed, do not get tired. He asked why she had answered. She said she had watched him spend his last breath on the dead. For years he had swept her grave and told her the small news. Souls keep accounts too. She remarked that his grip was wrong, and his boots were worse. Mentors begin as critics. Above them, the breach opened on night. Rain came down the shaft to meet them, cold and clean. Rowan climbed out of his own grave into the rain and stood there, letting it fall. The rain washed the grave dust off him in gray ribbons. He watched it go without mourning. Down the valley, the Vanguard's camp was already struck. Ash pits. Wheel ruts. No search party. In the capital, Garrick was telling the story already. A collapse. A tragedy. A shovel lost. The guild board would strike his name by morning. Rank F. Deceased. Debts none. Kin none. Morel heard the toast and did not drink. Guilt had finally found a shape it fit. On the ridge, Rowan opened the ledger inside his coat and shielded it from the rain. He wrote 6 names again, neat despite his shaking hands. The rite was finished properly now. The world had written him into its dead pages. He decided to let it keep the entry. Isolde stood watch over him with her sword point down, the way knights stand over kings. Somewhere behind the rain, the capital glowed, warm and sure, mourning nothing and no one. The world believed Rowan dead that night. The dead knew better. They had always known better. The rain gave out at dawn, and the marchlands took him in like an unmarked grave. Behind him, the guild would be writing his death into a ledger of its own. Rowan kept walking. A dead man owed the living nothing. It was the freest he had ever felt, and the loneliest. Isolde walked, where the road's edge blurred, silver hair drifting like weather that belonged to someone else. Her service was to see his rite finished. She had said it the way commanders accept a posting. The marchlands were one long graveyard nobody had finished. Every hill remembered a war by its bones. He worked as he went. A name, a grave dug true. The bell rung once, a page turned. Where the dead had names, he wrote them. Where they had none, he gave them the day. Behind his shovel, the hollows went quiet. He did not notice yet. The wraiths did. Isolde watched him bury strangers with more care than the living had ever spent on him. She told him a man presumed dead should at least walk faster than his own funeral. At dusk, she trained him. Dead men, she said, have no excuse to guard like farmers. She had commanded knights for 30 years. She corrected his grip the way winter corrects a garden. Rowan swung the shovel like a man digging sideways. Isolde said the enemy would die laughing. His hands knew soil, rope, and cold iron. They had never once been taught to argue back. She drilled his feet until the stars moved. Footwork first, she said. Dying men skipped the footwork. He fell down 8 times and thanked her 8 times. It unsettled her more than the falling. The fire warmed one of them. Isolde stood in it sometimes, out of an old habit of cold. He asked what passing on was like. She said she would tell him when she was finished here. Her name was in the ledger already, years old. He kept the page clean the way you keep a promise. 2 watchmen on an empty road. One breathing, one waiting. The marchlands slept badly all around them. On the 3rd day, the road forked at a toll cross, and a grave leaned there like an apology. Someone had planted a rapier for a headstone, 40 years of rust ago. Duelists get buried where they lose. Isolde knew the grave. She said the man under it had once been the finest blade on 4 roads. A tourney duelist who dueled the wrong toll baron and was left where he dropped. No right, no name kept. Rowan dug the grave true, squared the cairn, and cleaned 40 years off the rapier with his sleeve. He rang the bell once. The sound was too small for the sky, and exactly enough for the grave. He told the nameless man what he told them all, that he was seen, that he had mattered. In the ledger he wrote, "The duelist at the toll cross," and left a space where a name should live. Nothing rose. Nothing answered. The rite was not a summons, and Rowan had never expected wages. Isolde stopped mid-sentence and looked east. 30 years of command had taught her what silence meant. The dark between the trees opened its eyes, white-blue, in pairs, low to the ground, and many. Wraith boars, grief that had worn tusks, the unburied of some old drover war hunting in a pack. They came like a landslide, learning to run. Rowan counted 9 and stopped counting to live. He got the shovel up the way a man gets a door shut. The first boar hit like weather. Isolde met 3 at once, gold-green against the black, a war unto herself. It was not enough. The pack flowed around her like floodwater around a stone, and all of it wanted the living one. A tusk took his coat and some of him with it. He rolled, bleeding, into the cold cairn. His hand found the grave he had just made true. He did the only thing he knew, he asked. Not a command. Ritekeepers cannot command. A question, rung on cheap brass, asked of a stranger. The toll-cross grave answered like a held breath let go. Gold-green light stood up out of the earth. A lean man, in a road-worn coat, 40 years dead and grinning like the show had finally resumed. He gave his name with a duelist's bow, Farron Dre. Finest blade on 4 roads once. Dre looked at the pack, then at the shovel, and made a sound old teachers make. He could fight for Rowan once and be spent, or he could give the boy his life's work. Dre said a blade dies twice, the second time when nobody is left who moves like him. He chose the gift. The bequest poured from his hands like light, remembering how to be blood. 40 years of footwork arrived in Rowan's body at once. His heels moved before his mind agreed. The shovel came up in a line his hands had never drawn. Grave iron, held like a promise. The first boar charged, and Rowan was simply not there, and then the boar was simply not anything. Sidestep, measure, lunge, the dead man's craft, the gravekeeper's iron, black smoke tore like wet paper. For the first time in his life, Rowan fought beside someone, instead of behind them. What was left of the pack broke and poured back into the trees, ember eyes guttering out. The crossroads went quiet. Ash settled. And Farron Dre began, very gently, to come apart into light. Rowan understood the price all at once, the way you understand ice after it breaks. Dre watched his own hand go golden and thin, and his grin never lost a single tooth. Rowan started to apologize. Dre waved it off the way duelists wave off a bad seat at their own show. He said 40 years was a long wait between bouts, and the last one was worth it. Rowan opened the ledger to the space he had kept, and gave Farron Dre back his name. The duelist looked at his own name being written, and for one moment the showman went quiet. He saluted Isolde blade to blade, one master to another. She returned it like a door held open. The dead man smiled wider as the light took him. "Best bout I ever fought," he said. Then the crossroads held only the living, the mentor, and the place where a smile had been. The footwork stayed in his body. The man was gone forever. That was the whole arithmetic of his power. Every gift would be a goodbye. Rowan stood at the toll cross a long time, learning the cost by heart. Isolde let the silence finish before she spoke. Command had taught her when words would be cruelty. She told him Dre had chosen it freely, and that grief was not a debt he owed the dead. Rowan said he would grieve anyway. She said, good. That was the difference between him and Garrick. At the next dusk, she trained him again, and the dead man's footwork answered her like a student. She pushed him harder now, because now there was something in him worth the pushing. She said the shovel would do until the world apologized. He said it would do after that, too. They worked the roads north. More graves, more names, more quiet hollows where wraiths forgot to be. Villages started noticing the shape of it. A thin man, a shovel, a bell, and afterward, safe roads. A carter swore the Boarwoods had gone quiet. His wife swore she had heard a little bell. In a toll road inn, somebody gave the story a name, the way stories insist on names. They called him the Bellman of the roads. Nobody agreed on his face. Everybody agreed on the bell. The rumor walked faster than he did, the way rumors always had. This one happened to be true. In the ledger, Ferrandre's page stayed open a little longer than the others each night. Somewhere behind them, the guild mourned nobody. Somewhere ahead, the dead were waiting to be found. The Bellman of the roads walked north with his shovel, carrying a dead man's grace in every goodbye. The marshlands kept their dead the way a debtor keeps letters. Unopened and everywhere. Rowan walked them the way rain walks a field. Thoroughly, and without asking anyone's permission. The ledger had grown heavy that spring. He carried it the way other men carried swords. Isolde walked beside him where the light fell wrong, stern as winter, correcting his grip. The village had burned in the border war. Its people were still waiting in the ground. He dug until his bandages soaked through. Honor, done properly, had always looked like labor. Where the fire had eaten the names, he gave new ones, so nobody went down nameless. The bell spoke once, and the whole field answered it, gold, green, and quiet, like held breath released. Nothing screamed in the dark that night. The marshlands had forgotten what silence sounded like. The wraiths came to the tree line, tasted the air, and found nothing left to be. Isolde said the land felt lighter. Then she said his footwork still disgraced a dead duelist. Farm doors opened a hand's width when he passed. Fear, at first, then something more careful. He found the bread on a fresh grave at dawn, wrapped in cloth, still faintly warm. Nobody had ever paid Rowan gladly. He stood a long time learning how it felt. He ate standing, like a workman. Isolde pretended not to watch him almost smile. A child watched him from a fence rail, the way children watch things adults won't explain. The boy rang an invented bell with an empty hand. Rowan rang his real one back. The name had outrun him by a season. The Bellman, they said, of the roads. Isolde said fame weighed more than plate armor. He said he only carried a shovel. Another field, another trench of strangers. He worked through them, name by name, grave by grave. Behind him, green came up through the ash. The land was keeping its own quiet ledger. Mile by mile, the dead zones went quiet. Not emptied. Settled, the way debts settle. Then the road brought him to Hallow Ford, where a war had been left out in the rain. 10 years of unburied men lay in that mud. 10 years was long enough to turn. The wraiths hung over the bone field like smoke that refused to finish burning. He counted 9. Isolde said 9 was too many for a man with a shovel. He started digging anyway. The dead could not wait for better men to come. Better men had not been coming. He rang the bell as he worked. The wraiths flinched from it, like debt from daylight. Hunger won out over fear near dusk. They came across the mud with no sound at all. Rowan set his feet the way the duelist's gift had taught him. Grave iron made an honest blade. The first wraith swung claws of cold smoke. The shovel met it edge first, and it tore. 2 more came low. He gave ground along the trench, the way dead men had taught him. One reached him from behind. Isolde's greatsword turned it, and she called him careless while parrying. He was learning her lessons in the only school that mattered. The kind that bit back. White blue eyes crowded the dark around him. Every one of them had been somebody's unburied son. That was the thing the guild had never understood. Rowan was not fighting monsters, he was apologizing. The shovel came around in one long silver arc, and 3 of the dead came apart gently. The last wraith did not attack. It listened to the bell. Then it remembered being a man. It unraveled the way knots do when someone patient finds the right end. Gold green, then gone. He buried 10 years of strangers by lantern light and wrote until his fingers stopped obeying. By morning the ash lifted off Hallow Ford, and light came through where light had given up. Isolde looked at the clean field a long time. She said the duelist would complain slightly less. 200 miles east, the capital burned soulstone lamps all night and called the light progress. In the guild hall, the Silver Vanguard drank to a commission well buried. Reports arrived anyway. The quartermaster read the dispatches twice. The dead zones along the western roads were going quiet. Garrick took the papers with 2 fingers, the way he took everything, lightly, and for keeps. The harvest numbers were falling wherever the quiet spread. Somebody was closing accounts he needed open. He pinned the quiet villages to a map. The pins made a line. Lines meant a walker. The line followed the old war roads, village to village, grave to grave, patient as bookkeeping. Garrick asked who tended graves in the marshlands. A clerk said the farmers had a name. Bellman. The words sat in the amber lamplight between them. Garrick's smile stayed on. His eyes left. He said it aloud, to no one in particular. Dead men do not dig. But Garrick had built his fame on impossible things done quietly. He knew the smell of them. His fist closed on the report until the wax seal cracked. The lamp flame leaned away. He told the Vanguard nothing. Some doubts were assets, and Garrick never shared assets. He wrote the church. The letter went out before midnight under the ledger's seal. Certain questions answered themselves with wagons. Across the city, the guild archive kept its lamps low, and its records lower. Morel went in. She had not slept properly since the vault. Grief was simple, what she felt had splinters. The collapse roll bore her own signature. Rowan's name in her handwriting filed under acceptable losses. She had come for a different file. Tam, the porter, dead in a dungeon last spring. The wound report was 3 lines long. A single thrust. Narrow blade. Entry clean as a signature. Morel had dressed wraith wounds for years. Claws tear. Nothing about this wound had been hungry. She pulled other files with steady healer's hands. Porters. Guides. Hired men on Vanguard contracts. 7 deaths in 3 years, all blamed on wraiths, all buried fast, all conveniently unwitnessed. Every report carried the same countersignature, elegant as filigree. She knew that hand. Everyone did. Boots sounded in the corridor. She closed the drawer with the calm of a woman praying. A night clerk passed without looking. Healers were furniture too, in their way. Tonight that saved her. She copied Tam's report by candle stub, small and exact, into the lining of her satchel. For years she had seen Rowan clearly and said nothing. Silence, she was learning, compounded like interest. She blew out the candle and stood in the dark, deciding. The dark did not hurry her. Far to the west, dusk came down over a field of mounds that had waited 30 years. Rowan worked the rows until his shadow grew long and honest. One name, then the next. The bell had gone smooth where his thumb wrote it. Cheap brass, polished by pure attendance. Gold-green lights settled across the mounds like lamps being paid for at last. The field exhaled. Someone had left bread again, and a carved wooden bell beside it. The roads were keeping score. Isolde stopped mid-correction and looked at the ridgeline. Old soldiers feel eyes before they find them. She said they were being watched, and that the watching felt like cold coins being counted. On the ridge stood a black wagon under the ledger's seal. It was not going anywhere. Yet. A gloved hand inked Rowan's road onto a survey map and stamped it with a small ledger. Below, unaware, the Gravekeeper rang his bell for strangers. The church did not send soldiers first, it sent surveyors. The wagon stayed on the ridge until dark. Rowan worked and pretended not to feel it watching. By morning, it was gone. Isolde said wagons like that never left empty. They left carrying names. They walked east into the marchlands, toward a war that had been over for 10 years. Isolde knew the road. She had marched it once, she said, when the banner still meant something. The crows thinned as they went. Then the birdsong stopped. Then even the wind sounded careful. Ash rode the air here, fine as flour. Old ash, the kind that never finished falling. At his belt, the bell had begun to tremble on its own. It had never done that. From the last rise they saw it. Cindermere, the field where a kingdom had spent an army. 6,000 men had fallen here, breaking a siege nobody remembered. Nobody had come back for them. Rowan had buried whole villages by now. He looked at Cindermere and felt the ledger grow heavy. The dead lay where the war had dropped them. Spear rose in the grass. Helmets full of rain. Grass grew up through a visor. 10 summers of it. Rowan knelt and eased the helmet free. The trench lines still held their shape, the way a wound holds the shape of the blade. Isolde read the field like an old letter. She said the left flank had died standing. Hers had. Then he found the stake. Black iron, chest high, cut with the church's ledger seal. Cold to look at. There were more, a fence of them, ringing the whole field. Isolde said fences face a direction. These faced inward. And beside the iron, his little brass bell hummed like a held-back scream. Nobody had forgotten Cindermere. Somebody had fenced it, fed it, and written it into an account. Isolde used a soldier's word for what the church had made here. She said it was a farm. Rowan looked at 6,000 unburied men and did the only arithmetic he knew. 1 grave first. The shovel went in. The ground took it gratefully, the way starving things take bread. He was one small man in a field that had swallowed an army. He dug anyway. At the field's edge, he found a company still in formation. They had died without breaking. Their standard had rotted to a stick and a stain. Their line had not moved an inch. Under the sergeant's breastplate, a rusted tin case. Inside, dry as moth wings, the company muster roll. The 9th Company of the Marches. Every man signed or marked. Rowan handled it like scripture. He copied them into the ledger by lantern light. 211 names. He spelled each one aloud. Isolde stood watch while he worked. She did not say the stakes were watching too. He knew. It took 2 days to dig the 9th grave long enough to hold their line unbroken. On a shield rim, someone had scratched a marching song, the one about the road home being short. Rowan did not know the tune. He buried the shield with the sergeant so it would keep. Then he walked the trench end to end, ringing the bell, reading 211 names. He planted their own spears for markers, a picket line of them, straight as the day they mustered. The bell sounded thin against 6,000 silences. It rang anyway. That was the whole of faith. When the last name was read, the ground seemed to ease. Somewhere beneath, something old let go. And out across the field, one by one, the church's iron stakes began to sing back. Wrongly. Isolde's sword was out before he heard it. She said the field had been fenced for a reason. The center of Cindermere breathed in. Ash rose off the whole field at once, like startled birds. Then the ground stood up. Mud, rust, bone, banner. 10 years of unburied war rising as one body. A colossus fused from every man the church had refused a grave. It had no face. It had thousands. Rowan had seen wraiths beyond counting. He had never seen despair given a skeleton and told to walk. It was not a monster. It was a mass grave somebody had taught to stand. The Ash Titan. Isolde put herself between him and it, the way she must have stood in life. Old habits. The Titan's arm came down like a falling bridge. Where it landed, the old trenches ceased to exist. Rowan ran with his shovel and his bell, and the ledger clutched to his chest like a child. The ground opened beside his boots. The field itself was being pulled up into the thing, still hungry. Isolde met the fist mid-fall. One gold-green arc, and a hand the size of a barn came apart. It grew back before she landed. She said she had fought armies. She had never fought their leavings. Every cut she gave it, it paid for out of the field. Cindermere had deep pockets. Rowan pressed his back to a broken wagon and understood. You cannot kill what was never allowed to die. Then the bell pulled at his belt like a dog on a scent. It was pointing. Chest high. Center. Deep in the colossus, behind ribs of rusted spears, something burned cold. A heart that was a hoard. A lich-forged core of fused soulstones. Hundreds of harvests, pressed into one furnace. The experiment still running. He shouted it to Isolde over the wind. Break the heart and the body was only weather. She tried. Twice she cut a road toward the light, and twice the dead closed it over her. The third time, it swatted her out of the air like a lantern moth. Even ghosts can gutter. Then the Titan turned from her. It had smelled something better. It was wading toward the 9th. Rowan understood its hunger then. Honored dead, freshly laid. To a furnace his kindness was kindling. He ran for the graves, not away from the colossus. Under it! Isolde shouted after him to stop. He knelt at the picket line with the shadow falling over him, and opened the ledger to their page. He was ashamed to ask. They had been at rest one night. But he did not command, he asked. And out of the earth, in perfect order, 211 soldiers stood up into the light. Their sergeant looked at the colossus wearing his battlefield, then at Rowan. Nobody needed to give the order. They dressed their line the way they had died, shoulder to shoulder, and drew back their spears. One service, one cast. Every man of them knew the price of answering, and not one hand shook. Then the sergeant began to sing, the marching song from the shield rim. Only Rowan could hear it. The volley went up as one light. For a heartbeat, Cindermere had 2 skies. Then it fell. The spears found the heart through 10 years of packed sorrow. The lich-forged core cracked like river ice. The colossus came apart mid-stride, not slain. Released. 6,000 held breaths, all let out at once. Where a mountain had stood, there was a field again, and above it, snow falling the wrong way. The freed dead rose past Rowan's face like sparks from a banked fire. Some paused at his shoulder. And the 9th Company, spent, formed column one last time. They did not look like men who regretted. They marched. And they sang. The whole song now, every verse in 211 voices. It was a song for boots and bad roads, about a road home being shorter than you feared. Rank by rank they finished the verse and were gone. The sergeant went last, still holding the note. The song ended, where only Rowan could hear it end. He mouthed the last line with them. In the ledger, beside 211 names, he drew the little mark that meant gone home. He had won, and he stood in the winning like a burned house. Isolde let him stand. Far away, in a chapel of ledgers and candle smoke, a survey report reached its final desk. The Grand Sexton read it twice. Then, for the first time, he said the name. He said Rowan. The Titan lay in pieces across the old battlefield, and the ash fell like tired snow. Rowan closed the ledger on 211 new names. Each one had sung to him, and gone. The marching song still rang in his ears. No one living would ever hear it again. Isolde watched him the way commanders watch soldiers who have given too much and called it duty. She told him to rest. He said the dead rested. It was not quite an answer. On the ridge, the church wagon was gone. Somewhere far away, powerful men were saying his name. The bell hung quiet at his belt. He knew now what its humming in the vault had counted. Far to the east, the capital dressed itself for a triumph. Banners climbed the towers like ivy. In the church archive, Morel had stopped sleeping. The thread she pulled had become a rope. Harvest quotas, sealed and countersigned. Districts, tonnages, yields. The church farmed the dead like winter wheat. One signature repeated on page after page, elegant as a fencing move. She knew that hand. Beside the quotas lay Tam's wound report. A thin blade, clean and practiced. Not claws. Never claws. Tam had found the quotas first. Tam had gone into the dark and never come out. She folded the proof between bandages and dried yarrow, where nobody ever thought to look for treason. Healers learn when a wound is past saving. The church was one. Her silence was another. She left through the paupers, gate before dawn, past graves Rowan had dug for copper and kindness. Morning came gold and loud. The capital had a hero to worship, and worship is easy work. Garrick rode through the petals like a man being paid in a coin he had minted himself. The herald said he had pacified the marchlands. The dead zones were quiet, and he smiled. The quiet was a gravekeeper's work, done grave by grave. Garrick accepted the credit like rent he was owed. Soulstone lamps lit the route, burning pretty and cold. Nobody asked what the light had been. Children were lifted to see the Silver Vanguard pass. Heroes, their parents told them. Real ones. 2 days west, a healer walked alone into the ash, following rumors of the Bellman's roads. She read the roadside graves like a trail. Neat mounds, straight markers, every one of them named. On the dais, ministers praised the man who kept the kingdom safe. Garrick bowed exactly low enough. His hand rested on the rapier as he bowed. Some habits tell the truth about a man. Morel rehearsed what she would say to a dead man. None of it sounded like enough. Then she crested a rise and saw him, digging, alive, exactly as small as she remembered. Rowan heard her before he saw her, living feet, hurrying. He had almost forgotten the sound. Isolde was between them before he could turn, sword half drawn, glowing like a held breath. Morel stopped. A dead night burned gold-green between her and her apology. She raised her hands. Isolde asked if this was one of the ones who buried him. It was not an idle question. Rowan said no. Morel was the one who never mocked him. She had only ever looked away. They faced each other across a stranger's grave. 4 years in the same party, and strangers still. She had rehearsed for 2 days. What came out first was his name, said like a confession. Then she opened the satchel and gave him the church's arithmetic, page by page, seal by seal. Harvest quotas, yields per district, per season, per war. The dead measured out like grain allotments. She told him the battlefields were left unburied by policy, not a plague, a harvest. Isolde read over his shoulder and said nothing. She had died for a kingdom that did this. He asked how long. She said the quotas went back 30 years, older than either of them. Then she touched the signature at the bottom, the elegant one, and said he already knew it. Garrick Vane signed harvest the way he signed autographs, beautifully, proudly, 17 times in one ledger. Rowan thought of every grave the Vanguard had made for him to dig. Made, not found. There was 1 page left in the satchel. She held it like something that could still bleed. Tam's wound report, a single thrust, thin as a fencing blade, delivered by someone he trusted. Rowan had seen that wound in the dungeon, and kept his mouth shut. Servants learned to. She said Tam had found the quotas and asked Garrick about them, politely, believing in his captain. No record said what happened next, only the wound report, and a thin blade with honest handwriting. Tam died for finding the ledger. Rowan was buried for understanding it. The arithmetic was consistent. Rowan folded the report as carefully as he folded the hands of the dead. Evidence deserved dignity. The proof was delivered. What was left was harder. She stood there with nothing in her hands. She said, "I saw you. Every day for 4 years, I saw you, and I said nothing." She did not dress it up as circumstance or fear. She called it what it was. Cowardice. She listed her silences like symptoms. The coin flicked at his chest. The laughter. The forgotten name. Rowan waited to feel anger. None came. The dead had taught him how rare truth was. He crouched to her level, the way he knelt beside graves. Gently, without any hurry at all. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You are saying something now." He offered her the hand that buried heroes. She took it like absolution she hadn't earned yet. Isolde remarked that 4 years was slow, even for the living. It was almost a welcome. Forgiveness was not spoken and not withheld. It was set down between them, like a shared tool. She asked what he meant to do with the proof. He looked east, toward the Amber City. He said the dead had a case to bring, and every case needed someone to carry it. That night, the capital feasted its hero. Toasts rose like sparks and meant about as much. Garrick toasted the fallen of the marchlands. He had signed for most of them personally. The crowd chanted his name until the walls rang. Fame is loudest just before the bill arrives. Far from the feast, 3 exiles shared a fire. 2 breathing, 1 glowing, all of them certain. Rowan matched the quotas against his ledger, district by district. His names filled their empty columns perfectly. He was not building anger, he was building a right. There is a difference, and Garrick would learn it. Morale asked if he hated them. He thought about it honestly, which frightened her more than hatred. He said hate was a debt you pay out of your own pocket. He was already spending grief. By midnight, the plaza was petals and spilled wine. Triumphs are rented things. The sweepers know. A valet laid the rapier down on velvet. Cleaned, oiled, honored. It had killed a friend once. They broke camp at first light and turned east, toward the man who had buried him. He wrapped the ledger and the quotas together in oilcloth. The dead and their receipts, traveling together. Morel walked beside him instead of ahead. It was a small thing. He noticed it anyway. By the 3rd evening, the capital stood on the horizon, glowing amber, certain nothing owed was coming. Rowan held the bell without ringing it. Not yet. A rite begins when the grave is ready. The world still believed the Gravekeeper was dead. In a way, the world was not wrong. They came in through the paupers, field, past graves he had dug. His dead knew him. Rowan stood in the shadow of the wall, holding the ledger and the proof, and waited for morning. Morning came up amber over the capital, polishing the brass and the banners. Nobody was watching the west. Rowan had waited out the night in the shadow of the wall. The dead are patient teachers. Under his coat, wrapped in oilcloth, he carried the quotas, the wound report, and 11 years of names. Morella kept the copies, hidden between bandages and yarrow. If he did not come back, paper would. She asked to come with him. He said no one should have to watch this twice. Isolde walked at his shoulder through the waking streets, gold, green, and unseen, in step like an honor guard. The city was still sweeping up its parade. Garrick's face hung from lampposts, handsome and twice life-size. The vanguard kept the house near the palace, with gates that existed to be seen through. Rowan went in the way servants go in. Nobody looks at a man carrying a shovel. 11 years of being furniture had taught him exactly how far furniture could walk unchallenged. All the way. The stairwell wore trophies. Monster skulls, campaign banners, and nothing at all about the men who carried supplies. Behind the last door, Garrick sat alone with maps and wine, admiring the empire of his signature. He was practicing it on fresh commendations when the light from the doorway changed. Garrick looked up from his signature and saw a dead man standing in his doorway. For exactly 1 breath, the captain of the Silver Vanguard was afraid. Rowan counted it. 1. Then the smile arrived, and Garrick congratulated the gravedigger on learning to climb out of holes. Rowan set the oilcloth packet on the maps and unwrapped it without a word. Garrick turned the pages with 1 lazy finger and pronounced them forgeries. Forgeries were cheaper than fear. Rowan did not argue. He had learned from the dead that silence makes men keep talking. The signature on the quotas was elegant as a fencing move. It appeared 17 times. Somewhere around the 9th page, Garrick's smile began to require effort. He kept it working anyway. The lamp on his desk was a soulstone lamp. Beside the quotas, Rowan's bell began to hum. Garrick asked, quietly now, how a buried man gets out, Rowan told him. Somebody he honored answered. The captain looked at the shovel then, really looked, the way men look at a drawn blade. He had heard the stories, dead zones going quiet, a bellman on the roads. Arithmetic assembled itself. Fear does something particular to clever men. It becomes commerce. Garrick began, carefully, to make an offer. Wealth first, then rank, then pardon, each one laid out like goods a man could not refuse. The church would pay anything, he said, for a man who could quiet the dead on schedule. He said the quotas needed a shepherd. He said it gently, as if offering Rowan a kindness. He extended his hand across the harvest papers, the way merchants close on grain. Rowan looked at the hand. It had signed 17 harvests and paid for 1 thin blade. At his shoulder, Isolde asked permission to educate the captain. Rowan, regretfully, declined. He gathered the proof back into its oilcloth, with the care of a man folding a shroud. Then he asked Garrick 1 question, whether he remembered Tam's name. Just the name, nothing else. Garrick remembered debts, quotas, and his own reflection. The silence lasted 3 seconds and answered the question completely. Rowan said no. He said it the way ground says it, quietly, finally, without any anger to bargain with. The bell gave 1 small, honest note as he turned. In that room it sounded like a verdict. Garrick's hand found the rapier and stayed there, undrawn. There is no blade for a man wanting nothing. The morning crowd took Rowan back the way water takes rain. The captain watched from his window. Fear moves upward through institutions, seeking someone paid to hold it. Garrick wrote to the church before noon. He sealed it with black wax and told himself it was strategy. It was panic. Beautifully handwritten. A courier went through the streets at a gallop, carrying one frightened letter toward the cathedral quarter. The Church of the Ledger kept its god in ink. Its cathedral smelled of candles and arithmetic. Inside, ledgers stood in columns taller than men, chained like things that might otherwise testify. The Grand Sexton read Garrick's letter once. Some accounts a man recognizes without doing the sums. 30 years of quota stood behind him in chained rows. Exposure would unbalance every page at once. He was not angry. Men who farm the dead do not rage at weather, they adjust the forecast. On his wall hung a map of every battlefield the church had left unburied. On purpose. For years. He gave the order the way clerks close a fiscal year. Open every field. Harvest everything. The contingency was old, rehearsed, and filed under mercy. Hooded clerks went down to the wagon yards. Riders left the cathedral quarter in every direction, carrying writs with black seals and short instructions. At the old battlefields, clerks drew the ward stakes they had spent decades pretending were charity. The first ward fell at mid-afternoon. The field exhaled 30 years of unburied dark all at once. Field after field went up like black harvest smoke. Ember eyes opened by the 100, then the 1,000. The writs stayed nailed to the posts behind them, sealed in black wax, correct in every particular. From his balcony, the Grand Sexton watched the horizon stain and entered it in the books as revenue. The story was already drafted. A heretic Bellman who called the dead, and a church that saved everyone. The tide crossed the farmland the way night crosses it, evenly and without negotiation. A war's worth of unburied dead walked toward the capital. 10,000 grievances, none of them buried. The road villages emptied ahead of it in an afternoon, carts abandoned, doors open, suppers still warm. What the tide passed over, it did not leave behind. The unburied have always recruited by neglect. From his window, Garrick saw the horizon go wrong, and understood precisely what his letter had purchased. Dusk came down, amber and ordinary over the capital. Lamplighters worked the squares. Suppers were being laid. West of the walls, the fields had stopped being fields. The horizon line itself was walking. It came on like floodwater, patient and total, ember eyes surfacing and sinking in the black. The watch saw the fields move and told each other it was cloud shadow. The sun kept setting. A watchman's hand hovered at the alarm rope for a long moment, hoping to be wrong. In the shelter rows, Morel felt it arrive the way healers feel fever. She started moving people early. Rowan stood at an alley's mouth facing west, shovel-shouldered, and let the dusk tell him the truth. At his hip the bell woke and hummed. It hummed for soul stones and the unburied. Tonight, for a war. Isode read the horizon the way commanders read maps, and named it a war, not a haunting. Neither of them moved. You cannot outrun a debt, you can only decide who pays it. Rowan was not afraid of the dead. In 11 years they had never once given him reason. Across the city, the Vanguard mustered on parade instinct, polishing steel that had never met grief. The city noticed all at once, the way a herd does. Lamplighters froze halfway up their ladders. Prayers started in doorways. Most of them were addressed to whoever handled this sort of thing. The tide reached the base of the western wall and began, without one sound, to climb. The first hands were smoke, then hundreds were, finding the stone the way ivy finds a ruin. It did not roar, and it did not hurry. The unburied learn patience from everyone who forgets them. At the last edge of dusk, the tide crested the walls of the capital. The harvest had come home. The tide came over the walls at dusk, the way night comes to men who owe it. The watch bells rang first, high and brave and useless, like children shouting at the sea. 10,000 unburied dead poured down the stone, black as spilled ink, hungry as forgetting. Their eyes burned white, blue, and cold, the color of every winter nobody had mourned them through. Below, the lamplit streets emptied in one long scream that had no beginning and no end. Rowan watched from the alley's mouth, shovel in hand, and felt the bell begin to hum. It hummed the way it hummed near soul stones. The tide was a harvest, not a battle. Isode stood beside him, gold-green and grave, and said the sexton had opened every unburied field. Where the wraiths passed, the amber lamps guttered out, one by one, like candles pinched by careful fingers. A mother ran with her son on her hip, past soul-stone lamps still burning on stolen light. The wraiths did not hunt like animals. They drifted toward the living, like debts coming due. In the great square, the Silver Vanguard formed their famous line, polished for a war they understood. Garrick rode the line with his rapier high, and the crowd cheered, because crowds remember posters. From behind the shields, the tide looked like weather, the kind no one had ever survived. Garrick told his men that steel had answers for everything. He had paid that to be true. Then the tide came down the avenue, and the lamplight died ahead of it like a fuse. The first rank met its shields up, boots set, the way heroes meet things in the songs. Their swords went through the wraiths like oars through night water. The dead did not notice. A wraith folded around a shieldman, gently, almost kindly, and set him down empty as a glove. The cheering stopped. 10,000 people learned together what the church had always known about steel. Garrick's smile stayed on a moment after his certainty left, like a sign on a closed shop. He attacked anyway because fame is a habit, and habits die louder than men do. His rapier passed through the wraith without argument. You cannot fence with grief made solid. The wraith turned its ember eyes on him slowly, the way a ledger turns to your page. Garrick stepped back. In front of the entire capital, the hero of the age stepped back. The famous line buckled at its captain's heel. Courage runs downhill faster than any water does. The Silver Vanguard broke and ran through the crowd that had loved them, dropping shields as they went. A silver banner went down under boots. Nobody stopped for it. Banners are for the winning. Garrick screamed orders at the backs of his men. It was the first honest sound he'd made. The crowd saw him small and shrill and mortal. Fame dies in public, or not at all. Morel was already moving against the crowd, ash-blond and small, hauling a fallen weaver upright. She dragged strangers toward the stone undercrofts, 2 at a time, shouting directions nobody else would give. Her satchel was open before the wounded finished falling. Guilt, spent well, looks exactly like courage. She held the undercroft door while the city poured past her, counting heads like a shepherd. Then, across the breaking square, she saw a small man in an oversized coat walking the wrong way. Rowan came out of the alley, the way he entered graveyards. Quietly, and with work to do. His bandaged fingers found the brass bell at his belt. It was warm, like something waking. Isolde asked if he understood how many were out there. He said he was going to learn their names. He rang the bell once, small and cheap and honest, into a scream the size of a city. The nearest wraith stopped. Ember eyes turned, all together, like a field of candles bending to wind. People fled around him like water around a post, and some of them slowed to stare. Morel called his name across the square. He heard it. He did not stop walking. He only asked her to keep the living behind stone. The dead, he said, were his. Garrick saw him then, and understood nothing, which was the closest he ever came to prayer. Rowan walked into the Wraith-Tide alone, ringing the bell, one slow step after another. The dead did not touch him. They leaned toward the bell like cold men toward a fire. The black closed over the street behind him. From the walls it looked like being swallowed. Up close, the wraiths had faces. Farmers, soldiers, porters, everyone the church had left in the mud. He greeted them the way he greeted every grave, by looking and by refusing to look away. When one forgot itself and lunged, Isolde's greatsword met it, gold-green, gentle as a closing door. Beyond the walls, the church's black wagons waited in rows, patient as undertakers who charge by the soul. Somewhere above, the grand sexton watched his harvest ripen and mistook the bell for a dinner chime. In the panic, church criers were already selling a story. The Bellman had brought this, they said. But the crowd could see the Bellman from the rooftops, walking alone into what everyone else fled. Lies need the dark. He was carrying a bell through it, and it rang and rang. He was not walking at the tide. He was walking through it, toward the old burial fields. The capital was built on its own dead. Kings, yards, paupers, pits, war rows older than the walls. Most of those graves he had filled himself, copper by copper, name by name, year by year. Isolde walked at his shoulder and said the honored dead could hear him coming. All of them. He thought about the cost. Whoever rose for him tonight would never rise for anyone again. He had spent his life giving the dead their rest. Tonight he had come to borrow it. At the chapel steps, wraiths had cornered a bell ringer's family against the bolted door. Rowan stepped between and rang, and the wraiths turned from the living like a tide remembering the moon. The family ran toward Morel's lantern. Rowan was already walking again, deeper, bell arm tiring. His arm burned, his breath tore. The bell was heavier than any grave he had ever dug. Over the whole drowning city, under the screaming, people began to notice one small sound. A bell. It was the only voice the dead had ever had. Tonight the living listened to it too. The burial fields opened before him at the city's heart, acre after acre of quiet stones. The tide flooded every street around them and stopped at the iron fence, as if it remembered. Rowan walked the rows he had dug for 11 years, past names nobody else had bothered keeping. At the field's center stood the old war mound, where a kingdom's forgotten soldiers slept in ranks. He drove the grave iron shovel into the mound's crown like a standard, and caught his breath. Isolde looked out at the black horizon of the tide and told him it was time. He lifted the ledger, every copper funeral, every stranger, every debt of dignity the world had skipped. He could not command a single one of them. He had never wanted to. He would ask. Behind him, a drowning city. Beneath him, everyone he had ever thanked by name. Isolde drew her greatsword and set it point down in the earth beside him. She said, "Read." Rowan opened the ledger to the first page. Under the earth, something older than fear stirred. The bell hummed against his hip without being rung. 10,000 graves were humming back. He found the first name, written in a boy's careful hand. All that remained was to say it. The burial fields lay at the heart of the city, 10,000 stones under the smoke. He opened the ledger on a headstone, and the wind tried to take the pages. Behind him, the tide came on, a black wall with 10,000 burning white-blue eyes. He began with the first page, the first winter, a porter nobody else had named. The bell was small and cheap and honest. and he rang it after every name. Isolde stepped between him and the dark and said the reading was his, the door hers. The first wraiths came over the chapel roof like smoke poured out of a broken jar. Her greatsword took 3 of them in one arc, and she did not step back. Rowan did not look up. The dead were owed their names before they were asked. Under the grass, something old and patient turned toward his voice the way roots turn toward rain. One by one the graves began to glow, gold green, like lamps being lit down a street. He read faster now, not from fear. There were so many, and all of them mattered. Isolde held the rose end alone, and the light behind her grew with every spoken name. From the shelter door, Morel watched the graveyard shine, and pressed both hands against her mouth. The tide felt it too. The black turned from the walls and poured toward the light. A hand came up out of the first grave made of light, and it opened gently. A spearman of the old wars stood up through his own stone and looked at Rowan. Then 10 stood. Then 100. The ground gave its people back without a sound. He knew them all. The ferryman. The washerwoman's son. The knights nobody had carried home. Every face was a page in the ledger. Every page had cost him a bad winter. Then the whole field rose at once. 10,000 honor dead, gold green against the black. The city went quiet. And far away, on old roads, other graves he had kept were answering too. They formed ranks without an order given. In life, most of them had died waiting for one. 10,000 faces turned to the Gravekeeper, and not one of them looked at furniture. He asked them the only way he knew how, quietly, once, with the bell ringing. He did not command them. He had never commanded anything. 10,000 souls chose to answer. 1 service each, then gone forever. He knew the price. So did they. They stayed. Isolde walked out in front of them, and the ranks parted for her like water. The old soldiers knew her name, Dame Isolde of the Vale, the Wall of the North. She raised her great sword once, and the whole gold-green host broke forward into the black. They did not scream a war cry. They went the way tired men go home, unstoppable. The tide gathered itself into a wave of grief, and came down to meet them. For one breath, the street lay silent between them, gold on one side, black the other. Then the hosts met, and the sound was every funeral bell in the world at once. The spearman of the old wars put his point through 3 wraiths and set them free. Where the honored dead struck, the black unraveled, and stolen souls spilled out like white sparks. Rowan understood then. His host was not killing anything. It was finishing 10,000 funerals. Isolde fought the way legends are written afterward, and the wraiths broke against her like surf. On the wall, what was left of the Silver Vanguard watched the dead do their job. Garrick stood among them with his rapier hanging, and nobody was looking at him anymore. Rowan walked through the middle of it, unarmed except for a shovel and a bell. The wraiths flinched back from the bell's small voice, as if it hurt to want it. He rang it anyway over the battle, for every unburied soul the church had spent. The freed souls rose past the rooftops in their thousands, white sparks climbing out of the smoke. In the shelter, children pointed at the lights. Morel told them those were people, going home. Then the deep tide answered, piling itself into a giant with 100 borrowed faces. Isolde went to meet it alone, the way she had met everything else in 2 lifetimes. One cut, shoulder to hip. The giant came apart into rain that shone as it fell. The tide was thinning. Grief is deep, but it is not deeper than 10,000 goodbyes. Rowan read on through the noise. The rite was not the fighting. It was the naming. Across the square, the Church of the Ledger's great doors stood open onto a harvest hall. The grand sexton stood on the steps with a soul-stone crown, still doing the arithmetic. He raised his staff and called the tide to heel, the way an owner calls dogs. The tide turned, not toward the host, toward the man who had kept them from rest. He had farmed their unrest for 30 years. They knew his voice better than anyone's. He offered them quotas, pardons, and holy arithmetic. The dead had heard the sermon before. The wraiths climbed the steps without hurry. Harvest, they had learned from him, is patient work. Then his own harvest took him, and the ledger of the church balanced at last. His crown of stones rolled down the steps, cracked open, and let its prisoners out. Rowan did not watch. He had never once enjoyed a burial, and he would not start. Without its farmer, the tide lost its shape, and the host pressed it toward the river. What was left of the vanguard lay where the tide had first come over the wall. Garrick came down from the wall through his dead, and his boots were careful among them. He found Rowan at the field's edge and could not make his famous voice work properly. Then the captain of the Silver Vanguard went down on his knees in the grave dirt. He begged Rowan to call his men back. He said he would pay anything. Anything. Even now he reached for a price. Men like Garrick believed everything had a rate. Rowan looked at him for a long time, and there was no hate left to spend. His men had been spent on quotas they never saw, killed by a harvest their captain signed. He answered quietly, the way rites are read. The dead owe you nothing. Garrick heard it the way sentences are heard, complete, with nowhere left inside it to bargain. There was no cruelty in it. Rowan simply would not spend the dead on their spender. Then he picked up the shovel and walked back to work. The names were not finished. Garrick stayed kneeling among his men. For the first time, nobody anywhere was watching him. At the river, the tide made its last stand, and Isolde would not allow it one. The last of the black came apart over the water, and the night let go. The quiet afterward was enormous. Somewhere in it, a single cheap bell was still ringing. The host stood down among the graves they had risen from, waiting to be thanked properly. Isolde came back to Rowan's side, and her service was very nearly finished. Both knew it. The tide was broken. Dawn came gray and quiet, and the Gravekeeper still had work. Dawn came gray over the capital, and the tide was gone. The dead had held. 10,000 of them stood easy in the streets, waiting the way soldiers wait. Rowan's bell had rung all night. It sat quiet now in his bandaged hand. From the walls he looked very small, one coat and one shovel among 10,000. The living came out of the shelters, slowly, blinking, and found their dead waiting politely. An old woman touched a translucent breastplate and said a name nobody had said in years. Isolde stood at his shoulder still. Her service was not finished until the goodbyes were. The host was waiting for one thing more. The rite had an ending. And he owed it. He opened the ledger to the first page and began to thank 10,000 people. He said each name, and thank you, and the soldier it belonged to bowed. They came apart gently when they went, like warmth leaving a room in no hurry. Rank by rank they went up in gold-green light, each one answered by his voice. Near the end of one rank stood Tam the porter, shy, still wearing his boots. Rowan thanked him for carrying more than any of them ever knew. Tam went smiling. They went up like a harvest of light. The city stood under it, silent. The people of the capital knelt in the streets while their guests were leaving. An old veteran held a salute long after the brother it was for had gone. Someone had left bread at the field's edge. The old road custom come to town. By noon his voice was a rag. Morel brought water and stood where he could lean. A young soldier looked past Rowan to a gray-haired woman in the crowd. His mother. She had gotten old waiting, he had not. She waved like he was leaving for market. It took the whole day. Nobody in the capital went home while a name remained. Beside each finished name, his thumb left a small mark that meant answered, thanked, home. By dusk, the lamplighters were working around the last of the host, quiet as church. The last soldier of the 10,000 put his hand on his chest and went. By full dark, the plaza held 2 figures and a bell. Everyone else had gone home. Then only Isolde remained. He had known this hour was coming since the grave. Her service had been to see his rite finished. It was finished. She stayed anyway, a moment. She looked him over the way she had at every lesson, hunting for a flaw. She found none. She said his footwork had become almost acceptable. It was her whole eulogy. She straightened his coat collar the way she straightened recruits. Gently, and only once. He asked her if there was any way she could stay. He already knew the rule. She said the rule was the rule. From her, the words sounded almost kind. She said she had watched him climb out of a grave and make a door of it. He asked what he was supposed to be when she was gone. His hands shook, asking. She said he had never once needed her. He had only ever needed a witness. Her name was the oldest in the ledger he still visited. He touched it once. She drew the greatsword one last time and gave him a knight's full salute. Rowan had buried 1,000 people dry-eyed. He could not do it this once. Then Isolde said the words she had said at the grave. She said thank you. He rang the bell for her once, the way she was owed. It rang clean. She went the way the great go, unhurried, upward, still faintly smiling at him. The plaza was very large then. Rowan stood in it a long time, alone. He turned to the oldest page and made the mark beside her name, the last one. 3 days later, the kingdom held its reckoning on the palace steps, in public. They brought Garrick out in his filigree armor so everyone could watch it come off. The charges took a long time to read. Quotas. Fields left unburied. A porter murdered. The steps were the same steps where they had cheered him. The crowd remembered too. An officer unpinned a captain's silver from his chest. It had weighed almost nothing. His face did the arithmetic of a man learning what his name was worth now. They broke his rapier on the steps. Nobody in the square made a sound. Without the filigree, he was smaller than anyone had ever noticed. Just a man. On the steps, Garrick found Rowan's face in the crowd. He asked to be forgiven. Rowan looked at him a long, tired moment. He said, ask them, not me. In his cell, they said, he began writing names from memory. It was a start. It was not forgiveness. It was the only door Rowan left open for him. The kingdom's rolls had been kept beautifully for years. Beautifully and full of lies. The kingdom needed someone to keep the rolls honestly. Morel asked for the work. She started with Tam. Cause of death, corrected in her small, careful hand. Murdered. The guilt did not leave her. She had decided to put it to work instead. The new writ was simple. No dead left unburied, anywhere, ever, on pain of treason. Morel finally said the thing she had swallowed for years. She was sorry. He knew. She gave him a new ledger, blank, bound in good leather. For the next names. Some people guard a city with a sword. She would guard it with true entries. The king offered him everything a kingdom can put on a table: land, rank, statues. They wanted to build him a statue in the plaza he had emptied of ghosts. Rowan thanked him the way he thanked everyone, by name, and turned the glory down. He took the shovel, the bell, the old ledger, and the new, his whole estate. He told the court there were fields no one had gotten to yet. He was expected. The court bowed to an F-rank Gravekeeper on his way out. Nobody found it strange. At the gate, the people did not cheer him. They fed him. It was better. Behind him, the bells of the city rang the morning hour, all of them, together. The marchlands were still gray, but gray, that spring, kept catching the light. Rumor walked faster than he did. The Bellman was on the roads again. That evening, he opened the new ledger to its first page, clean as snow. He wrote the first new name slowly, the way he wrote every name, like it mattered. He talked to the fire a little, out of habit. Somewhere, someone's stern approved. At dawn, the road climbed a long hill. Beyond it, far off, crows were circling. Crows meant unburied dead. Unburied dead meant work. Work meant somebody still needed him. He went down the hill to meet them. The bell rang, small and cheap and honest.